Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Please join me in congratulating the US federal government. They've achieved another milestone, $39 trillion of debt. US national debt surges past 39 trillion, and of course, Trump told you he was going to pay down the debt. I don't know why anyone believes anything a politician says. Politicians are terrible at everything they do. They fail. They cause so many problems. And for most of us, sure most of you are Australian who are watching my video. Let's put it into AU dollar, so Australian dollar terms. The US debt in Australian dollars is roughly, at the current exchange rate, 56 trillion. 56,000 billion Australian dollars of debt. That's how much debt the US government has. US annual interest payments, we'll look more deeply at that in a sec. The US federal government in Australian dollar terms per year spends 1.78 trillion Australian dollars just to pay the interest on their debt. Of course, governments never pay down their debt. They always accumulate and grow debt. You want the free schools, you want the free age pensions, all that sort of stuff. You will pay a fortune for these things. You will pay with inflation, you'll pay with government debt accumulation. And just to put this into perspective, the amount of money the US government spends just to pay interest on its debt is equal to over two entire Australian government budgets. So, as much money as the Australian government spends in an entire year, all the Medicare spend, the age pension spend, the NDIS spend that everyone's so upset about, if you combine all that together, it only takes the US government about 5 months to spend that much to pay interest on their debt. And I'm going to look at their inflation problem, which is why they can't raise rates because they've got so much debt, but they've got an inflation problem. But we're looking at Senate.gov, the United States Congress Joint Economic Committee website, the debt. And let's have a look at this. Remember, so this is for the last year, so March 17th, 2026. At that point, Trump had already been in office for about 7 to 8 weeks, so he can't blame this on Biden. Remember, he said he was going to pay down the debt. Have a look at the numbers, right? The total. Intragovernmental just means the parts of the US government, but we could talk about that, Social Security trust funds, etc. Parts of the government borrow money from other parts of the government, but the total debt, so the change in the debt over 1 year, $2,800 billion. So the US government is borrowing money at a rate of almost 3 trillion US dollars per year. I don't know what that is in Australian dollars, probably 4.5 trillion. Change per day, we'll just add $8 billion of debt a day, no problem. And there's your chart of the national debt, 39.02 trillion. We can talk about the makeup of the debt, the interest rate. Like the average interest rate at the moment is 3.35%. Market interest rates are closer to 3.7%. That's probably a topic for another video, but the point being is that the US and the whole world has an inflation problem. It was a problem before this Iran conflict broke out, but much higher, if you've been watching my videos for a while, much higher interest rates are needed to combat the inflation, but they can't raise rates because there's too much debt. And the Federal Reserve had a meeting this week and they voted to hold rates steady. So despite what's going on with the massive spike in oil prices, the potential shortages, and I'll show you their inflation has been way above the Federal Reserve's target for years now. It's averaged well above target for 5 years. They're not raising interest rates because the inflation fight ended years ago. Inflation won, and now we'll have the consequences of all this massive government spending and debt accumulation. Again, I'm trying to find official sources. I'm not getting these from conspiracy sites or some guru's opinion. This is the Federal Reserve, their own website. Federal Reserve measuring government expenditures on interest payments. The federal government in the US spends $1.227 trillion per year to pay interest on debt. And of course, I converted that to Australian dollars just to show you how scary the number is. But for US people, or for people who want to base it, because it is a US dollar based thing, $1,227 billion to pay interest on the debt. And with the debt being accumulated at a rate of roughly $3 trillion per year, you can expect interest costs to go up. This is now about 20%. I believe it's about 20%. I think they collect about 5.1 trillion in tax revenue. So 20% of government tax revenue is going just to pay interest on the debt. They'll never pay down the debt. I don't know why anyone believed Trump. Now, this is the core PCE price index annual change. So this is a fancy way of saying the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure. So I just wanted to confirm that. It says it on the TradingView website. Trading Economics website. But if you ask the AI, what is the Federal Reserve's preferred measure on run inflation that they base policy on. The Federal Reserve has clearly stated that their preferred measure is this core PCE. Here are the reasons why. We can go through that if you want, but in the interest of time, let's just have a look at the inflation rate. Now, keep in mind the Federal Reserve's target. What is the Federal Reserve's target on inflation? Their long-run inflation target is 2% measured by the annual change in the personal consumption expenditures index. So this one that we're looking at here, they prefer the core, as we know, because it strips out. But here's the thing, this inflation rate strips out food and energy. So it's excluding the prices of food and energy. Now we know what's happening to energy, to oil right now. So this inflation problem, this data is only up to the end of January. So the US has had a long-term inflation problem before the spike in oil prices, before the spike in gasoline prices, as they call it over there. But keep in mind, this is the 2 area down here, right? At no point in the last 5 years, this is 5 years now, aside from when we were still, in the midst of COVID lockdowns, which was putting downward pressure on inflation. We were in lockdowns, people weren't spending money, people were staying at home, not working. Inflation was still 1.7% in February, but then quickly spiked. But the point being is that at no point in the last 5 years has there been a single month where inflation met the Federal Reserve's maximum acceptable target of 2%. I think the lowest rate was 2.61% in April of 2025. And what I've shown in this infographic, I've had the AI help me calculate this so it's more visually appealing for you. Notice that the 5-year average, keep in mind the Federal Reserve says that their long-run inflation target, so they're saying, hey, if there's a few months of inflation being too high, okay, we can't control it month to month, but long-term we want it to average 2% or be the target 2% average. It used to be 2% was the maximum. Now they've had to say, 2% is an average because inflation is so high. Well, over the last 5 years, inflation by the Federal Reserve's own preferred measure using government data, which I would argue understates the true rate of inflation, the 5-year average has been 3.57%, way above their target. Why aren't they raising interest rates? Why are interest rates on hold? Well, the reason interest rates are on hold is because of the debt, the interest payments. And then also, not just for the government itself, but what it would do to the US economy or the global economy. Everyone is up to their eyeballs in debt. We have to stop accumulating debt. And one of the ways to stop accumulating debt is to have higher interest rates. I mean, if interest rates were 15%, no one's borrowing $3 million to buy a 2-bedroom house in Sydney. The prices would have to come down. Yes, I understand that that's painful in the short term, but every year that we've let this problem go on and on and on, it becomes worse and worse and worse. And, these project, I wonder what, this debt is going to be by the time, the way things are going. I don't think it's that outrageous to say with a $39 trillion debt right now, Trump's got another 3 years in office. So let's assume it's $3 trillion a year, but it's going to grow. The debt's probably going to grow exponentially. It's not that outrageous to say that by the time Trump finishes his term, the US national debt could be $50 trillion US dollars. And I don't know what that'll be in Australian dollar terms at that point because the exchange rate will change. But right now, that might be 75, $80 trillion Australian dollars of debt. This is a massive, massive problem. It's getting worse and worse. These interest costs are just getting out of control. I mean, in 2020, the US government, was only spending $508 billion to pay interest. You could see back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Now, obviously, this isn't adjusted for inflation. They're collecting a lot more tax revenue now as well. Higher population, the economy's growing. But even as a percentage of the economy or a percentage of tax revenue, which I'd say is more valid. So anyway, hopefully I've shown you that the debt is growing. Trump lied, didn't pay off any of the debt, grew the debt, spent more than Biden, grew the debt faster than Biden. So another fail from Trump. The official sources showing the debt growing by nearly $3 trillion per year. Fed can't raise interest rates, interest costs out of control, inflation by the Federal Reserve's preferred measure, the one that they choose. Inflation has never... Why would you, as an American citizen or any citizen of the world, want, as much as your cost of living has gone up, why would you want your cost of living to go up another 3% on top of how much it's already gone up? I mean, how many years of zero inflation would they need to get back to their 2% average? And then, how high do interest rates need to be to get inflation to 0%? Because they raised interest rates to 5.5%, and that didn't stop the inflation. So that should be an indication that 5.5% was not high enough, or at least they didn't leave it there for long enough to suppress inflation. So anyway, please share this. Share this information with friends and family. If you want to support the work, please subscribe, like the video, share it around. I do appreciate it. And hopefully there's been some interesting info there for you. Thank you for listening. Cheers.